Hi, I'm Carolina, and today I will be presenting my work on encrypted access logging for online accounts. This is joint work with Alaa Daffalla and Tom Ristenpart. We're all at Cornell Tech. So nowadays, we all have multiple accounts everywhere for all sorts of services. And what happens on them has a big impact in our lives. And while there are a lot of benefits to these services, sometimes, as most things in life, they can be leveraged to cause interpersonal harm. Back in New York, I'm a volunteer at CETA, the Clinic to End Tech Abuse. There, we work with survivors of intimate partner violence, or IPV for short, with tech concerns to help them regain a safe digital environment. One of the biggest tech abuse issues faced by IPV survivors is account compromise, that is, illicit access to accounts by their abusive partner. Abusers might have access to the device unlocked or know the victim's password. Even after discovery, it might not be safe to evict them, so it is important for survivors to know whether access occurred. In some cases, this can even be used as evidence on legal processes. So, at CETA, one of the main things we help survivors with is account security checks. So, we have survivors log into their accounts they fear might have been compromised and ask them to access their account security interfaces, or ASIs for short. ASIs are these interfaces, like the one you can see on the screen, where users can check their account activity and see the devices where the account has logged in. So, if the abusive partner, who again knows the survivor and knows the password, logged in at some point, then during the appointment we will find an entry about it, and depending on the situation, we might suggest removing the malicious device and changing the password. This way, ASIs are very important in our appointments and for users in general to verify their online safety and detect potential compromise. However, ASIs are very easy to spoof, as shown by Daffalla et al. In 2023. Back to our diagram, the information that is sent during logins are actually HTTP requests. They include the login information and the string called the user agent. The platforms use the information from the user agent to display in the ASI. But this string is very easy to change. Using developer tools, which in most browsers are just 3 clicks, one can easily tamper with the information. So, the abuser can change the user agent to, for example, match one of the user's devices. Recall it knows the survivor and which phone model they own. And so, when the real account owner, our client, logs in, it is going to see the same entry twice. And this is clearly confusing for users. And this vulnerability hinders ASIs from meeting its goal of enabling users to see the history of their accounts and detect malicious activity. So, ASIs have an integrity problem, and in this paper, we explore whether we can involve the operating system to address this. In our work, we propose client-side encrypted access logging protocols, or CSAL for short, to provide device attribution. CSAL protocols are agnostic to authentication mechanisms and do not rely on external services, but we do require operating system support because we consider browsers untrusted. In our paper, we provide a formalization of CSAL protocols, a protocol and analyze it based on our definitions, and a proof of concept with some more discussion about deployment challenges. So, going back to our diagram, an idea is to involve the operating system as a trusted party. So, when logging in, users send the same information as before, and in addition, send some device identifier signed by the operating system. In this case, we have device IDs 1 and 2. You can think about this as, for example, the device serial number. that is provided by the operating system and cannot be changed by the user. The server stores the same information as before, plus the signed device identifiers. So, when the survivor requests the ASI, they will get the same information as before, but also those device identifiers, which serve as a ground truth to the user. This string can be attested to by the OS, so the user verifies that the string is honest and the browser didn't tamper with it. It seems fine, except that we're revealing these identifiers to the server, and that is not a good idea. As mentioned before, we're thinking this can be static IDs, which the user can identify and cannot tamper with, but at the same time, there is extensive literature on device fingerprinting and avoiding device tracking, and how one should not send static identifiers for platforms. And vendors like Android and Apple have restricted access to this sort of information for like 10 years now, always suggesting using user resettable identifiers. So, we're going to add the server to the thread model, and a new goal that we want for our system is privacy from the service provider. So to recap, in your thread model, from a computational perspective, we're considering a malicious browser or application in the client side, which is not trusted to provide privacy or integrity, and a semi-honest server that wants to learn the unspoofed device information. It's semi-honest because we don't have a solution to preventing meddler-in-the-middle attacks by the server. I will talk more about this later. And then we have a malicious user, which wants to tamper or circumvent creation of log entries. And recall that it can authenticate as the survivor, it knows the user's devices, and can try to impersonate it. It is possible that the survivor even previously logged in on the abuser's device, for instance. All of this to say that account compromise prevention won't cut it for this scenario, which is why we need tools like ASIs to detect and mitigate compromise after it occurs, and in some cases even provide forensic evidence for legal matters. So, to tackle this, we're going to rely on the operating system to do encryption and signing for users, and assume a malicious client cannot extract the keys and use them whenever they want. So back to where we left off, users will now have some keys created by the operating system, a public-private key pair, and a symmetric key K1. And during login, the first user will authenticate and send the user agent as before, but also send their public key. And it will use the symmetric key to encrypt the device identifier and send the ciphertext. The server stores all this information and now a ciphertext instead of a plaintext of device ID 1, and it will also store the public key 1. Then, the second user has a different set of keys. So we will have an extra round trip now. First, the user authenticates, and if that succeeds, the server sends a set of public keys for this account. And then the user sends back the user agent, the public key PK2, and the device ID encrypted under symmetric key K2. But it will also encrypt the symmetric key using PK1. The server stores all this information, including the encrypted key, and so when the first user comes back online and requests their ASI, the server sends back a log and all the ciphertext. And the user can decrypt it all and get the same view as before with the device identifiers. So, the user can recover all of the log entries, the server cannot learn the device IDs because they are encrypted, and the malicious user cannot spoof the entries because it cannot tamper with the keys that are stored in the operating system. This is a simplified version of the protocol. For more details, please see our paper. Now moving on to the formalization, we have three security definitions. We have log privacy and session unlinkability against an honest but curious server. So privacy is not being able to read the device IDs And unlinkability we define as not being able to distinguish between whether two sessions come from a same device or from two different devices. We also formalize an ability to access log entries, which is about being able to decrypt the log. We have a theorem that you cannot have privacy and retrieve all the log entries. A simple way of thinking about this is what if the user has a single device where it always connects and the keys are in that device, but then the device falls into the lake. Then, if a user buys a new device, it still cannot decrypt the old ciphertext. It would never be able to do so because the keys are at the bottom of the lake. However, if nothing was ever encrypted, then of course the user can recover the full log, but then there is no privacy. So, we also define the reachability graph to characterize the ability to decrypt ciphertexts, and we prove that assuming secure encryption, our scheme meets the two privacy definitions, and the ability to access log entries is characterized by the graph described in the paper. We conjecture that ability to access-wise, you cannot do better than the reachability graph while maintaining full privacy. Okay, so I talked about the main protocol, but there are some loose strings regarding the setup. So let's zoom out a bit and talk about the architecture. How could such a CSL protocol be deployed? If we go back to a running example, we said the operating system is trusted, the malicious user cannot tamper with it, and it sends some information to the server along with a signature to check the payload indeed comes from the operating system. But the OS doesn't really talk to the server directly. There is a malicious browser in the middle. So, what happens if someone tried to do an active attack? Where are the OS keys even coming from? Why can't the browser tamper with them? To protect against meddler in the middle by the browser, we need some way of authenticating the operating system and the server. But how? So, we wrote down some ideas. Let's first talk about the OS. We modeled the architecture based on the FIDO2 framework. FIDO2 is a group that has been working on passkeys as an alternative to passwords. WebAuthn is the API to register and authenticate users using an authenticator. How this works is that devices have authenticator. It can be enabled, for instance, with the biometric recognition that a lot of devices have these days. And this authenticator is certified by the vendors that produce it. So, in WebAuthn, there is an initial registration phase where the authenticator creates a pair of keys associated to the account and shares the public key and the certificate with the server. And then, when the user wants to log in, the server sends a challenge, the authenticator signs it, and so the server can verify the signature and the attestation with the public key and the certificate. Maybe this description can help understand why we inspire ourselves in FIDO2. Since basically, to work, this protocol requires collaboration and support across different tech companies, including operating system vendors. And also, this authenticator already handles some cryptographic keys. And it is a protocol that has been widely deployed. So, our idea is to extend the authenticator to also be an encryptor, as follows. The idea is to create another key pair, so now we have some signing keys and some encryption keys. And the encryption public key is also shared with the server, so it can distribute it to other devices accessing the same account. And then the other devices encrypt to these public keys. So, from the OS side, we propose a FIDO2 style certificates to have authenticity for the keys from the authenticator and encryptor. But we also need to authenticate the server to the operating system. And we do not delve too deep into this in our paper, but we envision something like TLS to authenticate the server. We can have a whitelist of servers to encourage them to behave well. And so, with these two ideas, we could prevent a malicious browser meddler in the middle attack, but not really a malicious server meddler in the middle, which is why I said at the beginning we consider a semi-honest a server. And addressing this is left for future work. We have a more extended discussion about this in the paper, so if you're interested, check it out. Finally, we have a proof of concept implementation in Python. The extra operations do require an extra round trip in the login, a couple of extra milliseconds and kilobytes in the payload, but these operations are not happening all the time, only when a user logs in or chooses to access the ASI. So the takeaway really is that performance-wise, this can be practical. We really think that the hardest part is this collaboration with OS vendors. So looking into future work, in our paper, we talk more about the architecture. As mentioned, we heavily take inspiration on the FIDO2 framework, and we wrote down some suggestions, but there is a lot more that is needed to have a collaboration between OS vendors and platforms. And these changes are definitely not trivial, but we have seen something similar happen with FIDO2 specs, so we believe this could be possible. And even parts of the specs of FIDO2 could be reused for CSOL. Formalization and protection against a malicious server would also be very important, and future work is also needed to understand the potential risks of ASI, and from the user side, understand what type of information should we include in the ASIs, like what would be most helpful for users. And that's it for the talk. Thank you all for watching, and please check out the paper.